Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. My name is John Manley. I'm the senior partner at Manley, Stewart & Finaldi and co-liaison counsel in this case against UCLA. And we're here today as the result of 35 years of neglect, malice, and fraud by UCLA on the female patients of Dr. James Heaps. Dr. Heaps was an oncologist and a gynecologist right here at UCLA for 35 years. And for the better part of that time, the senior leadership in the medical center and the medical school, and we believe the university itself, was aware that he was sexually assaulting his patients. And they did nothing. Last year, the legislature saw fit, after looking into this issue, to open the statute of limitations for Dr. Heaps survivors. And they gave them a year to file. And they had done the same thing in the USC case involving Dr. Tyndall. So by all rights, every one of these women who was sexually assaulted by Dr. Heaps under the guise of medical treatment, many of which, while they had cancer and were fighting for their lives, should have had till the end of this year to file a case. Cynically, Chancellor Block and the regents agreed to a class action suit that they could have easily defeated that is almost identical in terms of payment to the USC case. That's not a coincidence. The same lawyers that represented USC represent UCLA. Under that class action, it does a number of things that are bad, but one is it shortens the limit under which survivors can file a claim. They only have about 2 weeks left to file instead of the time the legislature gave. What's shocking about that is the legislature funds the regents who run the University of California system. They pay the regents, they pick them along with the governor. And yet they've done this, and the average payout in the class will be $11,000. Imagine you or your loved one, and many of us have cancer survivors in our family who are fighting for their lives, go to their doctor to save their life, get sexually assaulted by him, and that the only thing you can recover, no matter how bad your abuse is, no matter how misdiagnosed you are, is $250,000, but most will get far less. The average payout, as I said, is $11,000 per person. The average payout in the Tyndall case that was just settled and that our office resolved was $1.2 million per person. More importantly than the money, this settlement was reached with almost no investigation. There's been no depositions, no discovery, nothing. This settlement allows UCLA to keep its secrets, its dark secrets that allowed so many people who came here for life-saving treatment to be sexually molested in the middle of it. And it doesn't provide the truth. And why is that important? It's not just because some lawyer wants to make money or somebody wants a payout. It's important because the UC system is the premier medical system in this state, if not the country. If you're really ill in Los Angeles, where do you want to go? You want to go to UCLA. And this cannot happen again, and unless we know the truth, this will happen again. And the fact that UCLA has agreed to this cynical settlement where they say they want to care for patients is very troubling, because obviously they don't want the public, the patients, and the media to know the truth. Today, we're honored to have a number of survivors with us, and I'll introduce them. To my far right is Audrey Nofziger. Audrey is a survivor and one of the earliest victims of Dr. George Tyndall. She also happens to be a senior deputy district attorney in Ventura County and a prosecutor, a career prosecutor of sex crimes. And next to her is Julie Wallach. Ms. Wallach is one of our clients, is a survivor of Dr. Heaps, and courageously has agreed to speak publicly about what happened to her and UCLA's responsibility for it. Next to her is Lucy Chi. Ms. Chi is also a survivor of Dr. George Tyndall. And interestingly, Ms. Chi was the named plaintiff originally in the Tyndall class action. And when she figured out what was happening, opted out of it and allowed us to represent her. I'm convinced that if she had not done that, Ms. Chi would be sitting here with a $12,000 or $15,000 check, or a $20,000 or $90,000 check and no answers, instead of the seven-figure number she's likely to receive or could receive in the Tyndall settlement. And she has answers on how this happened to her and why, and who's responsible. To my left is Jane Reilley. Jane Reilley is a graduate of the UCLA Law School. She also went to undergrad here, and she's one of the lead lawyers on our case. Also to her left is my partner, Taylor Rayfield, who's one of the lead lawyers on the case. And I'm going to have them speak briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to our survivors to chat. Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you all so much for being here today. I think what's really important for everyone to understand about this class action is that it's done behind everyone's backs, and it's an opt-out, not an opt-in. So what that means, as UCLA has already decided that you will be part of this class action with no recourse unless you are lucky enough to receive notice, to read the notice, to understand the notice, and to realize that what they have done is bound you to something that you have never once spoken to anyone about. And that's the problem here. And this cannot be allowed. And everyone needs to understand that there is a deadline to opt out of that. And if you don't do that, you are stuck. UCLA should not be allowed to hide behind this. They have come out, and the report has shown that they knew about this, that they knew that they messed up. And instead of coming out and taking full responsibility, what have they done? They have crafted this basically secret settlement to bind people instead of saying, you know what, we messed up, our fault, let us take care of this. No, it's just another way to re-victimize these women, and it should not be tolerated. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all for being here today. If it wasn't for your coverage on this story, many women wouldn't know about this opt-out deadline, and as Taylor said, would be stuck in this class action settlement. So we so appreciate you being here today and covering this story. As John said, I'm an alumna of UCLA, undergrad and law school, and it's heartbreaking and enraging that now I know that while I was attending this campus that I called home for so many years, it was also sheltering one of the most prolific sexual predators we've seen to date. The women who sought medical treatment at UCLA, many of whom were literally fighting for their lives, deserved the absolute best care and the highest level of respect. And instead, they were violated by Dr. James Heaps. Now, these women deserve justice and they deserve answers. And instead, all UCLA has offered to date is a paltry and a rushed class action settlement. Fortunately, so far, hundreds of survivors of Dr. Heaps have rejected this class action settlement and are seeking true justice in the state court system. If you were abused by Dr. Heaps, we would urge you in the strongest possible terms to get answers, to assert your right to opt out of this class action. And you must do this by May 6th. It's a short deadline, as John said. You were supposed to have until the end of the year, but unfortunately that right was taken away from you. But if you reach out to us, we can help you. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have, and we will fight for you and continue this fight far beyond this class action deadline. Thank you very much.
I'll now introduce Lucy Chi, who, as I said, is a survivor of Dr. Tyndall and was the former lead named plaintiff in the Tyndall class.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here, for supporting all the survivors. It's very important to me. So I wanted to talk specifically about why I was the named plaintiff in the class action lawsuit. When I first saw that Dr. Tyndall was assaulting women at USC, I didn't even know whether or not he assaulted me. I just knew that I saw him and I wanted to know my rights. And I actually thought about Aaron Brockovich, believe it or not. And that's what got me thinking about a class action lawsuit. When I spoke with the class action attorneys, the same ones at USC that are also at UCLA. They didn't tell me what my rights were. They just encouraged me to use my name. And they didn't really even give me much time to think about it. 2 days after I spoke with them, they filed the lawsuit with my name, right and center. And I knew that something was wrong because I didn't understand what they were doing, and they didn't talk at all about accountability or even about a criminal case. I was lucky enough to find Manley, Stewart, and Finaldi, and I spoke to the great lawyers there, and I made the choice after speaking with them to opt out the class action lawsuit. I had a lot more time than any of these women do now. There is only 2 weeks left, and I know that there are so many survivors from USC that wish they found out earlier. So what I would encourage everyone who's hearing this story to do is to post on social media, tell your friends, tell your family about Dr. Heaps and about this settlement that happened behind closed doors. This is not going to hold UCLA accountable. And if it were just for this case, no one would know what really happened. I encourage you to tell everyone that you can, in case you'll reach one of the victims who don't know, so that they can opt out. I wanted to reiterate that it doesn't make sense to me. You know, I'm not a lawyer, and it doesn't make sense to me that these cases are opt out instead of opt in. Women should be survivors of attacks should be notified. So I want to point out that if it wasn't for the administration at USC and UCLA being complicit in these crimes, it would have stopped after the first victim reported. And it didn't stop. In both cases, it went on for 30 years, which is insane to me, how many thousands of women were abused when it could have been stopped years and years ago. Because there's no criminal case going on for any of the administration at UCLA or USC, this is the only way we can seek justice. If you were abused by Dr. Heaps and you're not sure what you should do, don't just think of yourself. Think about the other women that are involved in this case that you can help. And also think of the women in institutions across the country, at universities, at hospitals, who are probably being abused now. Think about what happens when they finally decide to report and when the administration at those institutions finally decide to do something. You want them to be held accountable too. And we want this to stop wherever it's happening, not just at UCLA and USC, but across the country. Opt out of the class action lawsuit so that you can seek justice for all of the survivors across the country. Thank you so much.
Next, I'm going to introduce a very, very brave woman, Julie Wallach, who has identified herself, and she'll tell a little bit about her story and how she feels about what happened to her and the way UCLA has treated her and her fellow survivors. Julie.
I'm Julie Wallach. I want to first say that it's not easy for me to stand here today, not at all. But it's incredibly important for me to be here, not just for myself and my own healing, but for all of the victims. I see you and I hear you, and I might not know you personally, but I know you. All of the legal jargon aside, like bills and statutes and opting in and opting out, that's not in my wheelhouse. I don't know about the legal piece of this. What I do know is that over 20 years ago, I was victimized by Dr. Heaps and by UCLA and by the Regents. And so at that time, I was, almost 30 years old, planning on getting pregnant, and I filed a complaint 20 plus years ago. I'm 51 years old now. And being able to tell the truth at that time was really empowering for me. But I chased after the chief of staff at UCLA. I called relentlessly asking for help. How do I file a complaint against this doctor at your medical facility? And I got nowhere. So eventually, and there wasn't, a search engine that could help me do it easily, I found my way to file a complaint, and it went totally unheard, totally unacknowledged. And I felt totally silenced and discarded. And I was. And this is by the system that was supposed to protect me. And they did absolutely nothing like that. They did the opposite. So finding out about, a class action suit, I don't know what that means. And UCLA never informed me. I never, ever heard a thing about it. What I can say, backing up a little bit from, when the class action took place, is I was scrolling through social media and I happened upon something that said, there are victims. Dr. Heaps has victimized women. He's sexually abused women. Are you one of them? And I just about collapsed. I sobbed for hours. It came out in the news, and I just sort of, I felt alone again. I felt re-traumatized. But when I saw this ad come up, I thought, well, it's my time. I tried once before by myself, and now I can build a support system, a legal support system around me. And I want to say to that end, I'm a survivor, and I have, PTSD as a result, and I've lived with this for so long by myself. But to know that I have this team, and together, all of us together, one of the things that's helping to empower me is to stand here today. And it's also to remember that those who are standing behind me today, the way I see it and feel it is that all of the survivors from SC, from all over the country and the world, and at UCLA where I stand today, totally triggered, by the way, to be here. It's not easy. We're all holding hands in solidarity, and I ask you to join me and join us, because you don't have to do this alone. I will say I've been on a really empowering road. It's been about a year and a half since I retained Manley, Stewart, and Finaldi, and I also want to say just a giant thank you to John. The very first thing that I heard when I called their office, and John called me back, and he asked me if I have a therapist. He didn't ask me about what evidence I have. He didn't ask me what I can do for him. He asked me if I had support. And that was everything to me, This road, since a year and a half ago, has been really empowering and healing for me. And it's also been really, really hard for me. Really hard for me. But one of the opportunities I did have was to speak on behalf of AB 3092, which lifted the statute of limitations for women like me, to file a complaint, and an individual complaint where I can be seen and heard and acknowledged and believed. And that was tremendous. I spoke to the Senate and I spoke to the Judiciary Committee, and not everybody has to do that to heal. That's part of my experience, but I spoke for all of us when I did that, and that passed unanimously. And there were people standing in the Senate, with the pandemic, we weren't able to be in person, but I was watching the expressions on these people's faces, these senators who were just in total disbelief and so emotional about this. And it passed. And now we have this opportunity to open a window for people whose statutes might have, expired. And the class action just it puts that to an end before we even have a chance. So for me, and I'll wrap it up with this, the individual lawsuit allows me a chance not only to tell my story, but to hear, what's really going on, what was really going on behind closed doors. I can't even imagine. I was saying before the press conference started today that when you have one person like Dr. Heaps doing what he did, do you know how many people around him have to make that happen, have to perpetuate that kind of crime? It takes a village, right? And that's just incredibly, it's reprehensible to me. I just want to take one more minute to talk to the victims, to talk to the survivors. One of my friends called me and said, he did it to me too, but I don't feel like I can come forward. And I get it. I really, really do. And I feel for you. And I don't know what your healing journey will be like. I don't even really know what mine is going to be like. But I'm ready and I'm open because we deserve justice. And every single one of us. So thank you so much, and thanks for your support. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Ms. Knopfsiger, who I said is a senior deputy district attorney in Ventura County and a survivor of Dr. Tyndall. She's not here in any official capacity, though, to make that clear.
Hello. Thank you for covering the story. Hearing Julie's story reminds me that the Bruin family did to her what the Trojan family did to me. And it's inexcusable, and it has to be handled differently. I am a 27-year career sex crimes prosecutor, and I'm one of the earliest survivors of Dr. Tyndall, former USC gynecologist, presently facing criminal charges. Tyndall sexually abused me during my exams in 1990, and then thousands of other women that came after me while he continued to work there, and while USC covered it up. When USC was finally exposed by the press, they got together with a few private attorneys and cooked up a class action lawsuit. I immediately smelled a rat. That is because I am a lawyer, and I know what class actions do. They benefit institutions and they benefit lawyers. They do not benefit victims. I immediately opted out of the class action because I wanted accountability and I wanted justice. Plain and simple, the class action allows UCLA to hide evidence about who knew about Heaps. It allows UCLA to hide about who covered up for Heaps. And it allows UCLA to cover up how long they knew while he sexually abused women for decades. That is not justice. The class action will not bring justice. For survivors remaining in the class action means no discovery, no hard questions. The top brass at UCLA will be left untouched and unscathed. There will be no answers and there will be no accountability. Because I opted out of the class action, and so many other women did too at USC, my lawyers forced these people to the table and they got answers. And through that process, I was protected. And in the end, my choice brought a very strong measure of justice. Heaps now faces 20 sex crimes charges criminally. However, no one else at UCLA who knew, who failed to report, or covered up for his misdeeds has been held to account. No one else has been arrested. No one else is facing criminal charges. And we have to keep in mind, Michigan State, people went to jail. Penn State, Jerry Sandusky, administrators went to jail. USC, crickets. UCLA, the same. The California Attorney General, Bonta, and the Los Angeles District Attorney, Gascon, must not fail to do their jobs. I am calling on them to aggressively investigate Heaps enablers and bring criminal charges if warranted for a full measure of justice for Julie and all the other survivors at UCLA who are grappling with what has happened to them. The survivors and the public who pay for this institution deserve nothing less. Thank you.
I just want to echo Ms. Knopfsiger and thank all of our survivors for being here. The fact that the Attorney General, both the current one and his predecessor, and neither Jackie Lacey nor Gascon have investigated neither USC or UCLA is despicable. Their job is to protect the public. Thousands of women were victimized by those of these physicians. Thousands. And not an investigation of either institution. Are we really that far gone that institutions now run this city, these two institutions? How many women How many women does it take to be sacrificed, their sexual and emotional health to be sacrificed before somebody in charge does something? It's wrong. Shame on all of them. You go to the UCLA Department of Psychology and ask any professor there, how long does it take people to grapple with their abuse? Usually it's well into middle age. You don't grapple with your abuse in 4 months because some bozo class action lawyer files a lawsuit. It's wrong. And it's just this suit is designed to do one thing: protect UCLA and enrich the lawyers who filed it. It doesn't benefit the survivors.
Talk about the possibility they're saying 73 million cap in class action. You're putting out potentially for student running up $300 to $500 million.
That's not up to me. That's up to a jury or a judge. What I know is I was the lead counsel on Nassar. I was the lead counsel on USC. Both of those cases settled for $1.2 million as an average per survivor. Some will get much more, some will get much less. But what I do know is, as somebody who had a family member who's a cancer survivor, actually multiple cancer survivors, you will never find anybody more vulnerable in their life than somebody who is literally fighting for their life. They depend on their doctor. And when an institution allows a doctor who was the highest paid doctor in the UC system to systematically sexually assault his cancer patients, that deserves attention, and it's worth a lot more than $11,000. I don't know what it's worth. That's not up to me. But the fact that that happened at this institution behind us, with apparently the full knowledge of the leaders of the institution, is despicable, and it deserves more than a cursory look. Our plan is to appeal, because if we don't hear from them shortly, we're going to appeal to the feds to open a civil rights investigation. Every one of these victims were women. This is clearly a civil rights matter, and we are very hopeful that Attorney General Garland would look into this. And I would expect members of Congress in the Los Angeles area and our senators to support that. There's no male victims in this case. They targeted women, and they violated the civil rights, and it deserves a federal investigation.
So you're asking me how UCLA handled it?
Yeah.
Okay, you ready? This is big. Get your notepads out. They did absolutely nothing. Zero. That's it. And I mean, just to elaborate on that, I'm being sort of facetious, but that's what happened. Nothing happened. And, I've sort of used this terminology around it that, I chased after the chief of staff at the time, but what that meant was calling relentlessly. May I speak with the chief of staff? Sorry, not available. May I take your number? That sort of thing. And it became so rote. And it built, over time. I started out just asking a question, and I got to a point where I was crying on the phone, and I felt rude, but I was screaming, like, is anybody going to answer my call? This is outrageous. This is ridiculous. How can this be happening? And it was, again, that sort of robotic shutting me down. And I guess, eventually they thought maybe that would work, but it didn't, because I took it further. Thank you.
Any other questions? I just add one more thing, and I address this to both the Attorney General and the DA and our politicians. There's so many politicians that get out there and say, I support women. Do something to support these women. Words are cheap. Take action. Make the feds and make the AG and make Gascon investigate this. This didn't happen because of Heaps alone. He had help. Thank you.